Hi everybody, we are going to talk today about the REM and EM relative units. I talked to you in the lecture, but I would like to demonstrate the basic differences between those two. I have here a very simple HTML, okay, that I created a header. Inside the header, I have a heading 1 and a paragraph. And I have a main element with 2 paragraphs inside of it. Now, in my HTML, although I put the HTML element here, as you can see, I do not have anything written here, okay? But for the header, I put a font size of 1.5 EM, the background color light blue, just to make a difference between the header and the main content, and the margin bottom of 1 EM. I mentioned in the lecture that it's very important to use relative units for font size. And with that, we are respecting the user choices when they make difference, when they change the settings of their browsers. So it's very important to respect that for font size. But a lot of times we can use the EM or REM for margin, padding, width, height, all those other properties of CSS. Let's see how they work. When you use the EM, it will be referring to the parent. So it's like the percentage. When you use percentage, it's the percentage of the parent. Okay, but the problem with EM is that it accumulates, meaning, suppose here that I have font size 1.5 EM, that's not accumulating with anything else because I did not put anything here with the HTML. So it will be 1.5 EM, okay, related to whatever is the default of the browser. By default, the browser is 1 EM, which by default is 16 pixels. But the user can change, and they may change the settings to present larger fonts, which mean that their default might be, for example, 24 pixels. So in that case, in that scenario, 1 EM will be 24 pixels. That's how you are respecting the user's choice. Okay, so, but let's see. Because if I put 1 REM, it would be also 24 pixels for that user that prefers larger fonts. So what basically is the difference? Now, the paragraph of the header is a child of the header, right? And for the header, I put 1.5 EM. But in the CSS, I also define that I would like to have all my paragraphs with font size 1 EM. So what I would be expecting to happen, that all my paragraphs, they would have 16 pixels in a normal browser, a browser with no changes in the settings, correct? So let's see this presented in the browser. As you can see, this paragraph inside the header has a bigger font size than the 2 paragraphs there are inside the main element. And this is because of the accumulation of the EM unit. So in reality, this paragraph here inside the header is not 16 pixels in my browser. I did not change the settings of my browser. So 1EM would be 16 pixels. It's 24 pixels, but why? Because the parent header had 1.5 EM that was inherited by that paragraph. So when that paragraph came and said, oh, but I want to be 1 EM, okay, my child, but I'm giving already to you 1.5 EM, so you're going to be 1 EM of that 1.5 EM. So it's accumulating, okay? Now, suppose that I would go here and I would change this paragraph here, instead of 1 EM, to be 1 REM. Now I'm referring to the root element. Who is the root element? Well, it would be the HTML, but I have not defined any font size here. So it's the browser, okay? And the browser in my case is 16 pixels. So I'm going to save this and I will refresh. And as you can see now, the paragraph inside the header has the same font size of the other ones, because it doesn't matter that this paragraph is a child of an element that has a font size of 1.5 EM, because when I went to the paragraph, I said, I want the paragraph to be 1 REM. So the REM gives to you more consistency, okay? Because sometimes when you are trying to make a font be smaller, but if that font size, if that element is inside an element with a font size that is too big already, that smaller that you are making is in relation to that big, gigantic font size. So let me show again here a change. I will make this to be 2 EM, and I will say, oh, but I want the paragraphs to be 0.8, like 80% of the root, okay? But I'm gonna remove the root and I'm gonna leave the EM. So 80% or 0.8 EM in relation to what? To the parent. Now look that now the header is 2 EM, which in my browser is 16 times 2 is 32 pixels. Okay, so 80% of 32 pixels is not gonna be 80% of 16 pixels. So let's see what's going to happen. You see, again, I have this paragraph here being bigger, okay, than the paragraphs in the main part, which were set to be 0.8 EM. In the main, look that I do not have any font size. So for the main part, for the main content, for the 2 paragraphs inside the main, this font size 0.8 is referring to the browser. But for this paragraph inside the header, it's referring, because it's EM, it's referring to the parent, which is the header. If I go here in the main and I put font size 3 EM, now the two paragraphs of the EM, the two paragraphs of the main element will be bigger, okay? So look, see? Those two paragraphs here, although I'm saying I want 0.8 EM, look that this 0.8 EM is not equal to this 0.8 EM. Because the 0.8, because it's EM, it's referring to the parent. So it's 0.8 of 3 EM. Okay, so it's accumulating from the parent. Now, let's see in regard, I'm going to remove that font size of the main that I did not have. I will put that font size to be 1 REM for the paragraph, and the font size of the header to be again 1.5 EM. Now, let's now pay attention to margin. I put here a margin, okay? Margin bottom of 1 EM. So after I save, so as you can see, there is a space here between the end of the header element and the main content, okay, of 1 EM. But 1 EM in that case is not accumulating, but it's related margin, width, height, padding, border, all those CSS properties. If you use EM, you are relating, you are referring to the font size of the element that you put. And then you might ask, but what if you don't define a font size inside the CSS? Well, it always have a font size, right? That might be coming from the body. So it's related to the font size. Now, look at this here. If I put a font size of 3 EM in the header, look how this margin is going to grow. And I did not grow. Look, margin bottom 1 EM, okay? Look how it grows. It grows a little bit more because now it's related to the font size 3 EM. Now, if I put font size 0.5 EM, okay, look how it's not going to be 1 EM. I mean, it's going to be 1 EM in relation to 0.5 EM. Okay, so look how it's going to shrink. See? Very tiny margin here. Now, if I put, okay, it's 3 EM again, but here it's REM in the margin. Now look what happens. Continuous 1 REM. If I put this here to be font size 2 EM, you're going to see that the margin bottom is not going to change. It's going to be with that same size because now I'm referring to REM. See? So that's it. That's how you use this. If you practice this, especially, and you might even think about like, how can I mix both? Well, I mixed here, okay? Although I keep saying to you that I prefer to use font size always with REM, because then I'm referring to the root. So look how it's going to change, because the heading one is going to be smaller now. See? Because now this year, although I did not change the value, but I changed that it's going to be REM. Now, can I use this mixture? Yes. I put here a CSS for a button that I had commented out. It did not show up, okay? And look what happens. Now I'm going to show that button. File, save, and let's show that button, okay? Here's the button here. Now, as I said, the properties of padding, width, height, border, all those properties, they refer to the font size that you apply to the element or the font size that the element inherited. So here I put the font size to be 1 REM, and I said that the padding is going to be 0.5 EM, because I want this to be related to the font size. Now, let's see why. Suppose that I put that font size to be 2 REM. File, save. You see how the button grew proportionally. The padding grew proportionally, and the width grew proportionally. I did not change the value of the width or the value of the padding, but because they are EM, then they are referring to the font size of the element. Now, if I put REM for the padding and REM for the width, and I'm going to leave with the 2 REM for the font size. Look what's going to happen. See? Because my font grew 2 REM related to the root. Now, because I asked padding to be 0.5 REM, I'm referring to the root. To the root of the HTML. And the width, same thing, 4 REM. So it's going to be 4 REM. And my browser, 16 pixels is 1 EM. So 4 times 16, 64 pixels. And it's not going to grow because the font size of the button grow. So in that scenario, there you go. You have a mix of REM for the font size and padding and width with EM, because then it will grow proportionally. Okay? So that's it. And I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a little bit more about the difference between EM and REM. Have a nice day.